This is just a first impressions video of Super Smash Bros. For the Nintendo 3DS. And as a first impressions video, this isn't going to be an extensive review. In fact, by the time I got around to doing this, I hadn't really tested all the characters, though I did take a look at most of the play modes. Alright, well, I guess I'll give you my first impressions of Super Smash Bros. For the Nintendo 3DS, which was a game I absolutely had to get. Well, my history with the game series probably would start with when I first read a newspaper article on the original Super Smash Bros. For the Nintendo 64. At first, absolutely fascinated by the idea of a crossover game with all these Nintendo characters. Then when I realized what little story characteristic it had was little more than they were basically toys fighting. I immediately lost interest when it wasn't going to have any story to it whatsoever, other than it was going to be toys of the Nintendo characters fighting. So I lost interest, but I eventually did get it. I did get Super Smash Bros. For the Nintendo 64, and I did get it after I got Super Smash Bros. Melee for the GameCube, so I didn't get it right away, needless to say. But I only got it because of my already existing fascination with the Super Smash Bros. Series. And compared to the Super Smash Bros. Games that would have come after it, the ones which I would have played before it, was actually pretty disappointing. It seemed like a pretty standard Nintendo 64 game. A game where you were stuck using a Nintendo 64 controller, which is one of the controllers I like the least of all the controllers ever made for a game system. Also, the graphics were nothing special, the gameplay was even less special, and, well, I think there were some people out there that had a lot of nostalgia towards the game, but to me, I never played it 4 players, but to me, the best of the Nintendo 64 games were basically games that were merely adequate, that had a 4-player option, that, so every now and then you'd be up all night with 2 or 3 friends, playing the game. So the 4-player option on, at best, average games. The only real game that stood out to me on the Nintendo 64 was Conker's Bad Fur Day. GoldenEye, the only thing I liked about it was you could play 4 players. Other than that, I thought it was a mediocre game. Star Fox, I liked it more than the Super Nintendo version, but again, so for me it was just another Nintendo 64 game that turned out to be a Nintendo 64 game. And the GameCube, I absolutely loved the GameCube as a system. I thought the GameCube was great. And if ever there was a game that I'd give at least a 9 out of 10, well, maybe only 8 out of 10, but Super Smash Bros. Melee, now this was awesome. Over in the other room, I do have the Nintendo 64 version. I don't really have the box for it. I got it used. Actually, I got this version used as well, too. But I got the case and manual. Made sure that I got that. And this game, I had already got Super Smash Bros. Brawl by the time I got this. But when I first read about this one, I was more interested in this one than the Nintendo 64 one. What I had heard of the Nintendo 64 one actually made me less interested in this than I otherwise would have been. And I was interested in this. It's revised. There's no story to be played out, but there is a story to the game. As you unlock the history of all the Nintendo characters in this, there's a lot of stuff to unlock in this. You're also unlocking the history of the world itself. You'll get the background of Master Hand, how he's an otherworldly being that recreated basically characters and environments from the various Nintendo universes, the Nintendo multiverse, and turned them into trophies. Copied or borrowed, perhaps borrowed their personas from various times and points in their home universes and forced them to fight. And, you know, as video game plotlines go to set up this sort of thing, it actually wasn't that bad. And it was incredibly fun. Parts of it reminded me a lot of playing Zelda 2 on the Nintendo Entertainment System, which was something I really enjoyed. I mostly probably played Mario more than any other character because I really liked Mario and it was a very playable character. But the other characters here are a fair bit of nostalgia for them, actually. Um, and I really, really like this game. Like, I'd probably give this game a 9 out of 10 if I were to rate it. I could understand somebody only giving it an 8 out of 10, but this, to me, should be a high-rated, awesome game. It was fun to play. And you get to use the GameCube controller, which was also the best way to play this one here. Now this one, this is a 10 out of 10 game if I've ever seen it. Of the era of Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, and Nintendo Wii, this is one of the 3 best games of that era. The other ones I would place as Ghostbusters, the video game, and Bayonetta. And this is one of the best games of its era. I'd give this one a 10 out of 10. I had to pick it up simply because it had Sonic the Hedgehog. I hadn't gotten around to picking up Melee yet, but Brawl had Sonic the Hedgehog, and Solid Snake too. I have a lot of contempt for most military games, but I kind of like Metal Gear. And having Solid Snake and Sonic the Hedgehog, well, that was just awesome. And Solid Snake, well, let's face it, next to Mario, it's a hilarious contrast. But I love the juxtaposition of all those characters. This game actually had a real full story, too. Not just the background that made up the world and environment. They had the Subspace Emissary, which was the first part of the game I completely went through, and that was absolutely awesome. And one of the reasons I picked this up was Sonic the Hedgehog. I was going to get it anyway, but when I saw Sonic was in there, I had to get it very soon after it was released, as soon as I could. And I kept playing through it, battling a god from subspace, tearing apart worlds to recreate them to his own whim. That was the kind of storyline that I thought, well, Sonic the Hedgehog should be here. Why are they taking so long for Sonic to show up? And, spoiler alert, you might want to skip ahead about 30 seconds here if you don't want to know one of the key plot points. Sonic the Hedgehog shows up and saves the whole Nintendo multiverse. I thought to myself, wow, that, well, actually not only is appropriate, but a shocker too, that they actually let it be written that way. And actually the storyline in this, wow, I mean, written by one of the guys that, I guess, if I read correctly about this, the writer for the storyline also did Final Fantasy games. So, you know, they went all out on making sure that it was a well-made game. And all the bonuses in it, not just the story mode was awesome. There was so many things to discover in there, so many trophies, and the information on the trophies as you unlocked them was actually interesting. Even if you already knew everything about the characters, rereading it as presented in this was actually very interesting. Like, this game had amazed me on so many levels. It's like, wow, they really make really awesome games still. And this was one of them. I mean, there are very few games out there that I would say would top this one, Super Smash Bros. Brawl. And if I were to come up with a scale where 0 was no value in the game whatsoever, 1 was only as good as the Nintendo 64 original Smash Brothers, 5, halfway up the scale, was as good as this one, which is really worth more than 5 points out of 10. But on that same scale where this one's only worth about 5, half the scale, and this one is the full length all the way to number 10, where would Super Smash Brothers for the Nintendo 3DS rank on that? Well, I'd give it a 4. The game itself is, you know, a pretty good game. I definitely would rate it more than 4 out of 10 on a scale where 10 is the perfect game and 0 is worthless. It's definitely well more than a 5. I might give it a 7, 7.5, maybe 8, 7. It's hard for me to say, but it actually doesn't feel as good as a Melee. And when this was first announced, the first thing I learned was Mega Man's going to be in it. And to me, the next best thing to having Sonic the Hedgehog in there would be having Mega Man in there. But somehow this game, even with Mega Man, I was surprised how much I enjoyed having Pac-Man in there. realizing how much nostalgia for that character, even in his 3D incarnation. I mean, his 3D incarnation, I was familiar with Pac-Man World 3. He seemed like a cross between Mario and Sonic without the charisma. Without charisma. I mean, he seemed like a pleasant character. But I really enjoy having Pac-Man in there. In fact, it was only today, a week after buying the game, I didn't get around to playing the game as much as I normally would. I was busy. That I finally got around to playing with Mario, which is always one of the characters I play the most. Every time I picked it up and played it, I either played Sonic, Mega Man, or Pac-Man. And I was surprised Pac-Man won me over that much, but I'm really impressed with the characters. Having Sonic, Mega Man, and Pac-Man in there, and an ability to play them with Mario, I mean, that should be perfect. That on its own should be even better than Melee. But something about the presentation, and the various modes, the game itself just isn't feeling as fun as Melee. And part of it could be that the controller for this is basically a smaller version of the Super Nintendo controller, which was never one of my favorite controllers. The GameCube controller, despite its kind of weird Fisher-Price-like appearance, actually is an excellent controller, fast responsing. You can get your finger in a good position over the buttons and hit any of the buttons quickly. This one's just awkward and it just doesn't feel right. But this game, actually, it is a pretty good game, quite fun, but after having played the other Smash Brothers games, it feels flawed. It could be the small screen. I'm not sure. If I were to go into the modes right here, I mean, and really, if it was as good as Melee, it would blow Melee away just for having Mega Man, Sonic, and Pac-Man in it. But to me, it doesn't feel as good as Melee. Playing as Smash, well, Smash is about the same when you're in Smash. You have regular Smash or Team Battle. That's all good and fine. The group game, well, you require more than one Nintendo 3DS for that. The challenges, there's not nearly as many challenges as in Brawl, but then again, Brawl kind of went overboard with how hard some of the challenges were, so I'm not going to complain too much about that. Smash Run, I played a bit of Smash Run. I gotta say, I wasn't that impressed with it. Not nearly as good as the adventure mode in Melee. Doesn't touch story mode in Super Smash Bros. Brawl. I mean, you can't compare to that. I mean, if you weren't going to put a story mode in this after how awesome Brawl was, then you're just ignoring one of the best features of the previous game. Sorry, but that was a distinct step down. Games and more, the solo mode, not bad. Classic and All-Star, comparable to, some of the features in Brawl, but All-Star didn't feel as fun as All-Star and Brawl. Well, I have to admit, I find the new version of All-Star be quite annoying. More often than not, failing due to the awkwardness of maneuvering around the levels and actually getting beat up by the characters. And it's actually really kind of frustrating and annoying. In the vault, the trophies, even the information on the trophies didn't seem as interesting as I went through it. I mean, the information they give you on your characters just doesn't seem as impressive as what it had been in previous Smash Brothers games. I mean, part of the game was it was just interesting to go in and see the information on the various characters and how it was portrayed in the Smash Brothers game. And to be honest, so far I've been finding the information on your trophies in this one to be rather flat and uninteresting. So I gotta say that a little bit of a disappointment. But hey, even a bad Super Smash Brothers game isn't that bad, and it's actually not a bad game. It's just that I would say, if you go for one first, unless you have to have Mega Man or Pac-Man, I'd say pick Brawl up first, and maybe consider Melee. I mean, it's when you have Mega Man and Pac-Man in there, it's hard to say, go get Melee before you get this one. But I think I would actually take Melee over this game, no matter how attached I am to the idea of having both Mega Man and Pac-Man and also Sonic the Hedgehog in there. Melee didn't have Sonic the Hedgehog. This has Sonic the Hedgehog, Pac-Man, and Mega Man. To me, that should make it almost perfect, having those characters plus Mario. But it's actually not quite as good of a game as Melee or Brawl. Hopefully the Wii U version will be even better. You never know. Can't say. Haven't played that one yet. Should be out soon. But as it stands now, even with all the benefits of Sonic the Hedgehog, Mega Man, and Pac-Man, still only put this up to about equal to Melee. Brawl is really the one I'd recommend. But yeah, so my first impressions of this, and my impressions might change as I play it more and get more used to it and discover more things in it. I actually haven't had that much time to play around with it, even though I had it for a week at this point. But all I can say is, I think it's a good game. It's worth getting if you already had Smash Brother games and liked them. And it definitely is a benefit, and it actually is one of this game's strengths to have Mega Man and Pac-Man added to the group, and Sonic the Hedgehog is also important. Would have been nice to have Solid Snake in there, but you know what? I could probably do without him. I'd be pretty disappointed to lose Sonic, though. And if you didn't have those 3 extra characters, I'd say Melee would blow this one away completely.